two things that Mike Egini is saying. One, that INEC cannot be hacked. Two, that INEC could clean up the voters' register. But somebody that rose to the position of assistant director in INEC was able to use his position, his access code, to register photographs and impute fictitious names into the INEC register. Now, that person was caught. The question is, how many other high-ranking INEC officials have done the same thing and were not caught? Let's not make that mistake at all. INEC can be infiltrated. There are human beings at INEC. And like people say, every human being has a price. They are human beings that man or control the so-called technology at INEC, and these human beings can be bought. And the examples that Mike Egini gave proves that point. So we cannot let our guards down. INEC can be compromised only in two ways. One, from the inside, but the one that I am most concerned about is compromise aided by security forces. The only ground on which INEC can be successfully infiltrated technically now is by electoral violence. But one thing that gives me hope is this. Truly, the power has moved to the polling units. But then, what happens if a polling unit is disrupted? Like we saw in Lagos in 2019, like we saw in Kogi in 2019, like is rampant in most other places that we cannot even get video evidence for. What happens when the elections in the polling units are disrupted? I'll tell you what happens. INEC cancels the result in that polling unit. So which means that if there are 1,000 polling units in a state and a political party decides that a particular stronghold of the opposition party does not favor them, what they will do is send in thugs and disrupt elections in those polling units. And INEC will now come and say, oh, there was electoral violence. We cancel election in those places. Have these people not successfully infiltrated and compromised INEC? So INEC can hold its hand in the air and say, our systems are impregnable, but then they have been compromised technically, because even though the power is at the polling units, these enemies of Nigeria have been successful in disrupting elections at the polling unit. As far as I'm concerned, for there to be free and fair election in Nigeria, it has to be peaceful. We have to ensure that election at the polling unit is free and fair. Election at the polling unit is free and fair. And for that to happen, we have to do one of two things. One, we have to ensure that thugs do not come to disrupt election at polling units. And two, we have to also ensure that security forces do not collude like some of the security personnel have done in times past. So you can have the Inspector General of Police having good intentions, but what happens to the DIGs, the AIGs, the Commissioner of Police, all the officers under him? Can he 100% vouch for what happens for them? Nigerians need to put systems in place to make sure that the elections at the polling unit are not disrupted. And how do we do this? Look at the election in Kogi. Look at the election in Lagos. When the thugs came and they started shooting in the air and brandishing their weapons, nobody stood. I wouldn't advise anybody to stand because I wouldn't wish anybody to be killed for nothing. When they started shooting in the air in Kogi, nobody will stand unless you have gun. Even if you have gun, you still stand the risk of being killed. So what do we need to do? If this kind of situation repeats itself, that elections get disrupted at the polling unit. These people bank on the weapons that they have cached. They bank on it. They bank on the thugs that they have empowered. They bank on the security personnel that they have bought over. See, we can shout all we want. When these people get into action and they start shooting their guns and they start brandishing their weapons, they start killing and maiming, people will run. At the end of the day, there will be nobody to provide evidence. They are banking on this. So I am suggesting that to counter this, we need a good network of security or surveillance cameras, battery-powered, Wi-Fi enabled surveillance cameras, very small miniature surveillance cameras. See, when they start shooting at the polling units, people will run, but cameras will not run. We need to capture the faces, the voices of these thugs, of these security personnel. We need to capture their faces to ensure that the sanctity of the polling unit is not tampered with. We need to deploy battery-enabled, Wi-Fi-enabled miniature surveillance cameras across the 176,000 polling units. We need to do this. If not, they will still come and use their old tactics. They will use the thugs they have empowered. They will use the security personnel that they have bought over, and they will disrupt elections at the polling units. And they hope to do this to provide grounds for INEC to cancel election in areas where there are violence, so they can carry areas where they think they have strongholds. The talk can go on and on and on about how INEC is impregnable. I am more concerned about how they are planning to disrupt the elections at the polling units.